I skipped my brother's wedding, and it was the best decision of my life. The first memory that came to mind was the weight of it all, literally and figuratively. As far back as I could remember, I'd always been the fat kid. In kindergarten, while other kids squabbled over toys or chased each other in playful games, I was the child who watched from the sidelines. It wasn't because I didn't want to join in, but because I knew I'd never be as quick or as carefree as them. My size made sure of that. By the time I was 6, I'd already learned that the world didn't have much patience for people like me. Big boned, my mom used to say with a comforting smile, as though her words could shield me from the sharp taunts of my classmates. They couldn't. In school, I became a walking target. My body wasn't just my own, it was a canvas for everyone else's ridicule. And the jokes, the name-calling, the relentless teasing, they never seemed to stop. But the worst part wasn't what the kids said, it was what they didn't say. I could live with the mockery, as cruel as it was. But the silence, the way they whisper to each other and glance at me like I wasn't even there, was what really broke me. It made me feel invisible, even when I stood right in front of them. At home, things weren't much better. My younger brother, Brandon, was everything I wasn't. Charming, athletic, magnetic. He was the golden child. If I was the shadow, then Brandon was the sun, bright and dazzling, impossible to ignore. And just like the sun, he had a way of eclipsing everything around him, including me. But despite everything, I adored him. I was his older brother after all. I wanted to protect him, to be the person he could rely on. Yet, as we grew older, that bond began to fray. The first real betrayal came when I was 13. Brandon was 10 at the time, and we were playing in the backyard. It was a rare moment of camaraderie, just the two of us, kicking a soccer ball back and forth. I wasn't particularly good, but it didn't matter. Brandon cheered me on, his laughter infectious. Then, out of nowhere, the neighbor's kids appeared. 3 boys, all older than Brandon but younger than me. They weren't mean, not like the kids at school, but they had a way of teasing that stung just the same. "Hey, Brandon," one of them called. "Why's your brother so slow? You should have been the older one." Brandon laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a half-hearted attempt to fit in. A full-bellied laugh that echoed in the yard. I froze. He didn't defend me. He didn't brush it off. He just laughed, and in that moment, I realized that even my own brother thought I was a joke. That night, I lay in bed replaying the scene over and over. The sting of his betrayal burned deeper than any insult from a stranger, and yet, when morning came, I pushed it down. I told myself it didn't matter, that he didn't mean it. But something between us shifted that day. By the time I was 25, Brandon was getting married. His fiancée Lily was perfect in every way, beautiful, kind, and everything my parents had ever dreamed of for their golden child. The announcement of their engagement was met with tears of joy, champagne toasts, and endless discussions about wedding plans. For me, it was just another reminder of how far behind I was. I'd never been in a serious relationship, never felt truly loved or desired. My weight had always been a barrier, both physically and emotionally. Then came the conversation that changed everything. "Listen," my mom began one evening, her tone hesitant. "Brandon's wedding is a big deal. There will be a lot of people there, family we haven't seen in years. Maybe this could be a good opportunity for you to, focus on yourself." "Focus on myself?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've been talking about wanting to lose weight," she said quickly, as though that made it better. "This could be the motivation you need." My heart sank. It wasn't enough that I'd struggled my entire life. Now, even my presence at my brother's wedding was conditional on my appearance. For weeks, her words replayed in my mind. At first, I was angry. Then slowly, that anger turned into determination. Not for them. Not for the wedding. For me. The first day at the gym was humiliating. Surrounded by mirrors and people who seemed to belong there, I felt like an imposter. But I kept going. Day after day, week after week. At first, it was agony. My muscles ached, my lungs burned, and the scale barely moved. But then, something shifted. I started to feel stronger. Clothes that had once been tight hung looser. Strangers at the gym began nodding in acknowledgement. By the 6-month mark, I barely recognized myself, not just physically but mentally. For the first time in my life, I felt in control. I wasn't doing this for my family anymore. I was doing it for me. When I returned home for the family reunion, the reaction was immediate. My mom gasped, tears welling in her eyes. My dad clapped me on the back, beaming with pride. And Brandon? He looked stunned. For once, he didn't have a snide comment or a smug grin. But as the evening went on, the familiar dynamics crept back in. Brandon monopolized the conversation, regaling everyone with tales of his wedding plans. My parents hung on his every word, their pride palpable. "You look amazing," Lily said to me at one point, her sincerity disarming. "I hope you know how proud you should be." Her words meant more than she could ever know. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom. The tuxedo hung neatly in the closet, but I couldn't bring myself to put it on. The thought of standing there, surrounded by people who had never truly seen me, felt unbearable. In the end, I made a choice. I wouldn't go, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. For once, I was putting myself first. When I called Brandon to tell him, he was furious. My parents were devastated, but for the first time in my life, I didn't care. Months later, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. I'd lost more than weight that year. I had shed the expectations, the guilt, the need for approval. For the first time, I felt free. And that was worth everything.